Welcome to the Practice Brave podcast. I am the host, Brianna Battles, founder of Pregnancy and Postpartum Athleticism and CEO of Everyday Battles. I'm a career strength and conditioning coach, entrepreneur, mom of 2 wild little boys, and a lifelong athlete. I believe that athleticism does not end when motherhood begins, and this podcast is dedicated to coaching you by providing meaningful conversations, insights, and interview topics related to fitness, mindset, parenting, and of course, all the nuances of pregnancy and postpartum. From expert interviews to engaging conversations and reflections, this podcast is your trustworthy, relatable resource for learning how to practice brave through every season in your life. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Practice Brave podcast. Today I'm here with Dr. Lamia Zafrani, and I'm really excited to talk to her because she is an OBGYN. She's a pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coach, and she is a pregnant athlete herself. And I think this episode is going to help kind of connect the dots between so much of what we hear in the fitness industry, in the practitioner medical worlds about pregnancy exercise, contraindications, and just sort of the limited scope that truly exists and how we can all work together to support pregnant athletes and honestly just improve the state of women's health around the world. So Lamia, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Give us a little bit of background on who you are professionally, your background, education, the work you're doing, your life as an athlete. Give us a rundown.
Great. So I'm currently a consultant in obstetrics and gynecology. So the US equivalent is I'm an attending. I work at my local hospital, and my training, or my specialist interest, I should say first, is I'm a obstetrician with a specialist interest in high-risk pregnancy, so maternal medicine. I do general gynecology, early pregnancy, and acute gynecology. And the other job that I have on the side is I work as a pediatric and adolescent gynecologist, specifically in cases working alongside the police with child sexual abuse. So that's just something that I did kind of outside of my training to kind of give back. In addition to that, my hobbies include being a powerlifter. I've been powerlifting since I was in my early 20s. I'm 37 now, so I'm still going strong. And I kind of found Brianna mostly because I combined the fact that I was an obstetrician in training at the time. I was also an athlete myself, and I would get the odd athlete patient, and I actually didn't really know how I could advise them other than, I don't know, listen to your body. And if you've been doing it before pregnancy, carry on. So actually, my specialist interest in sort of the pregnancy and postpartum athleticism grew partly out of the fact that I knew I had a hobby and I wanted to be able to carry on with this safely through the next seasons of my life whenever I got to that. But I also wanted to be able to advise my patients responsibly. And because we're so used to practicing evidence-based medicine, I knew that I had to go looking for the evidence. And if it wasn't there, I was going to find someone who had the evidence or make it.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad we connected. I mean, I feel like we've been like in each other's lives for quite a few years now. And it's been cool to have found each other. And Lamia, she was awesome. She became a pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coach. And I was so stoked that an OBGYN took interest in that. Like, I just was like, oh my gosh, we're slowly starting to infiltrate the medical community as like more nurses and doctors, OBGYNs get involved in that. And you have just been such an incredible resource. Lamia actually is one of the expert interviews in the curriculum for the coaching certification, because we as coaches, sometimes we feel conflicted with like, my doctor said to do this or not do that. And then like, we're trying to translate that information to a lot of the clients that we're working with, or, maybe you're an athlete yourself and your doctor said one thing, don't lift over 20 pounds, or like you can run that marathon, and you're like, cool. And I think there's a lot of I think it's really easy for people to feel like, well, if my doctor said this, then that is the end all be all. So can you talk a little bit about some of those belief systems and I guess where it becomes short-sighted?
I think from a patient perspective, I understand that because you go to your doctor, You assume that they know what they're meant to know about their field of interest. But as a doctor, and as a good doctor, all good doctors will know that where their limitations lie. And, we have to be very honest when it comes to things like nutrition, when it comes to things like exercise and athleticism. I mean, if I go back to my medical school training, I spent 6 years at university. We probably had one module on nutrition, maybe half a module on exercise, very much limited to the thermodynamics of calories in, calories out. And I'm really hoping we can change that, but that up till now is still the extent of our training, sort of medical training in nutrition and exercise. And if you think your doctor's coming at it from maybe that limited amount, unless like me, they've gone and got other training, then if anything, they're probably going to err on the side of caution when it comes to pregnancy. I mean, we can look at, okay, you can put obstetricians aside because we're specialists in pregnancy, but if you speak to any other doctor, they are almost scared of pregnant women. As soon as you go in to see another specialist and you happen to be pregnant, oh, it's almost, we have to get the obstetrician on board, which is fine. But we're still women, we're still humans. Whatever the medical issue is comes first. But people kind of forget that, so they do treat pregnant women slightly differently. And actually, when you have to think if our training hasn't really trained us on pregnancy and athleticism in pregnancy, where is that advice coming from? And that's why I'm quite open enough to say when I don't know something or where we don't have the evidence for something. And I feel that as a good doctor, it's my duty to tell my patients, look, I don't have this evidence. I'll go and look for it. If it doesn't exist, I'm very open to say it doesn't exist. But yes, your doctor, in summary, I guess your doctor may not be trained in athleticism in pregnancy and may just be coming from a scope of erring on the side of caution when they advise you.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think too what we're so limited in the research, and there's a lot of, unfortunately, still a lot of flaws in the research that we do have. And I think the main problem, especially when we're talking to the pregnant athlete, is we know the research confirms, like doctors, they do know that exercise is beneficial to mom and baby. There's no arguing that. That has been published over and over through the years. Where we are so limited in research is then kind of looking at the zoomed out picture of women's health and of long-term athletic performance, especially as it relates to the mother's core and pelvic health. Her body physiologically changes and experiences trauma and change, even if like birth is uncomplicated, right? Like even if like all things go perfectly, they've still been physiologically transformed through pregnancy, through delivery, and then through whatever their postpartum experience looks like. Hormones are changing, structurally they've changed, tissues have changed. And now we're adding a layer of like performance goals and performance interests on top of a body that has been fundamentally altered for the last year to 2 years. And so when we say X, Y, and Z is safe, or yeah, you can keep doing this, or don't do that, like we're looking at it through such a limited scope. And I think that's where we have to kind of be able to, if you're the pregnant athlete yourself, look at your own, be able to be like an expert on your own body and have this like high level of self-awareness. So you're like, it's not just if I can do this, it's if I should, because I know that maybe my doctor isn't considering my diastasis or my incontinence that I'm having. And maybe they're also not considering that I want to compete in powerlifting or triathlon at a year postpartum, or I'm trying to make a run to compete wherever, like, right? Like there's just so much limitations to both the evidence and to looking at the whole picture, from our coaching staff to practitioners to doctors.
And this is why it has to be collaborative, because even with the training and the knowledge that I have, oh, I love it if I get an athlete patient in clinic, but I don't actually have the time. I'll start the consult and I'll be like, oh, what sport do you do? And how many times a week do you do it? And what's your intentions? But then I have to literally think, okay, I've got a 15, 20-minute appointment. I'm not going to be able to do this, which is where I'm quite happy to then have allied health professionals like yourself, like pelvic floor physios, so I can signpost my patients to reliable allied health professionals who we work in collaboration, because I'm not going to know what a pelvic floor physiotherapist does and the ins and outs. I'll have a general overview, But, if you need to see a pelvic floor physio, you go to them. And I think our job should be, A, being open-minded enough to go and get the knowledge to fill the gaps that we have, but then to be respectful enough to work in collaboration with our colleagues.
Yeah, we can learn from one another. Like, I'm not trying to be an OBGYN or pelvic floor PT, but oh my gosh, there's so much to learn just through a conversation or, with when we're trying to get clarity around the person that we're supporting. And, that can't be done at every level, but at least through the patient's experience, when they feel like their support staff, so to speak, is like in alignment or cohesive, it's going to make their experience so much better. But, I do think a lot of people, and I got to be careful with how I say this, but there's almost a justification for their training choices because they say, well, my doctor cleared me, or I was told it was okay. My doctor said it's fine. Therefore, I'm going to double under this baby out. I'm going to sign up for this. I'm going to run like 5 miles at 5 weeks postpartum. My doctor said it was fine. So it's like this blanket statement of like almost making you this default, like, I'm going to put it on my doctor. My doctor said it's fine. Therefore, like, whatever anybody else has to say just doesn't really matter. And like they kind of use that as either a crutch or a justification, which again, like you said, we understand because that's like, it's almost like you are the person to guide it. But I think that general population needs to understand that like, you're actually not that person to guide those kinds of specifics. Your scope is
No.
a lot more limited to the physiological considerations, like basically the athletic readiness or the physiological readiness, not the athletic readiness, I should say.
And even the 6-week postpartum check that we have, and you're cleared. You were kind of touching on this. What does it actually mean? Cleared for what? Cleared to
Tell me, I
look
don't know,
after
right?
another human and keep them alive, and you're cleared to have sex again. Although that's another loaded topic. And just because you're physically cleared, do you? There's so much to it,
Yeah.
and yet we're not even thinking about athletic readiness, what sport you were doing before, to what level you want to compete, and what your 1 year postpartum looks like. We can't do all of that in a, I don't know, 20-minute, half an hour checkup
Yeah.
when that's not actually what's in our minds. And,
Right.
unless you
That's like, well, that's not what you're checking for. That's more
know.
of the goal of a pelvic floor PT is to know, like, okay, here's the trauma to your pelvic floor. Here's the situation of your abs. And then like my job is like, and what does that mean for exercise? Right. But your job is physiological
Yes.
readiness and healing and any contraindications there. So let's talk about that. I guess we can work backwards here. So from a you're cleared standpoint, what are you actually checking for to determine if somebody is cleared for whatever it may be?
Funnily enough, in the United Kingdom, it's not actually the obstetricians that do your 6-week postnatal check. It's actually your family physician, so your GP. So it's not even an obstetrician that actually checks you. You'll be seeing a health visitor and a midwife, which is kind of similar to obstetric nurses, but slightly different. So essentially, it's not even an obstetrician. So it's not even something that I particularly do. It's more the family physician who sort of looks after the patient from sort of childhood till their old age. And they are usually checking them with them, the mum and the baby together. And your appointment will probably get split depending on what questions you have about your baby's health as well. So again, it's not in the United Kingdom anyway, in the UK, it's not even tailored to just the woman, but we're essentially, they will be checking, if you had any complications prior to delivery or antenatally or postpartum whilst in hospital, your blood pressure, for example, gestational diabetes, all of these things, they'll make sure that the follow-up for those is there, if that has all resolved, if it was all obstetric related, check in with your mental health, or they're meant to, checking about your mental health and just things to do with feeding, nutrition. And if you have any obvious pelvic floor symptoms at that point, having said that, 6 weeks is probably a bit early, and women probably have a lot of symptoms at that point. So 6 weeks to me actually feels like a very early point at which to be essentially discharging women back into go off into everyday life. And that's the last time you're going to see a health professional unless you come and look for one.
Yeah, and that is, I remembered that. I guess I didn't fully remember that after my first birth. And then after when I had Chance, I was like, you mean I see you now, but then like I'm not gonna see you again after pregnancy. You're like in there all the time, and then I feel like at the end, it's like you're in there every week. You know, you're going in and checking this and checking that, and there's so much like care and attentiveness. And then like you have the baby, and it's like, well, I'll see you in 6 weeks. I just saw that baby exit your body, but like I'll talk to you later. Like I'll see you in a while, and then not again until you're maybe back at your women's well physical at a year. And I just remember thinking like, God, I like guess I forgot that that's how it goes, at least, you know, for me in the US. And yet, like, that is kind of standard of care in a lot of ways. Like, that's just how it is, even though during pregnancy, there's a lot of, like, you're just attending to so much more.
Yeah.
Even though, like, there's kind of less going on when you're pregnant in some ways, not all the time, but like, it's kind of uneventful during pregnancy, hopefully. And like postpartum, it is very eventful. There's just a lot going on. Your whole entire body and life and everything is a lot more eventful.
I mean, in the UK, it's even worse than what you described. We don't necessarily have women wellness checks on an annual basis. So potentially the next time I'll see that woman again is when she's pregnant again,
Oh my
as
God.
as an obstetrician. So yes, that this is kind of when the rest of the network needs to step in. And unfortunately, with the healthcare the way it is, and the resources and the lack of resources, unless you go looking for that sort of in a private, sort of privately, or if you know of pelvic floor physio, etc., it's not necessarily that that support system is there as an automatic feature for women after they've delivered, which other parts of Europe are different. I mean, I have a friend and colleague who delivered in France, and she said they all got mandatory pelvic floor physio at some point postnatally for a certain package, and I think that should be basic for everybody.
Yeah, I think we have a long way to go with like changing the entire system of
Yeah.
women's health and supporting mothers. So that is a whole other podcast for another time. But yeah, I mean, you just realize like I think maybe it's easy to turn your head to when you are not pregnant or you know you're not considering becoming a mother, but then once you do you're like, man, like this is such a significant change that so many women, so much of the population experiences, and yet there's just not a whole lot of support, not a whole lot of understanding. And if we're still trying to have like our identity and autonomy as an athlete, as someone like who, you know, you want to maybe go back to work, you want to do this, like you have other complementary goals, there's just not a lot of support in figuring out how to navigate that. And it's just, yeah, again, that's a whole other probably rant for another day.
Yeah. I mean, I something you mentioned a bit earlier on, and it was around athletes having sort of insight about their own body, and it kind of reminds me of what you say a lot about. A lot of the advice will come some shape or form around, well, listen to your body,
Right.
and that's fine. And I do think that to an extent that is what we need to be doing, but actually, you need to teach people what they're listening for. So I don't quite like that we shouldn't really discount the listening to your body, because we should trust our instincts and our intuition. And ultimately we all have it, but it is a case of, well, what cues are we actually listening out for? You've told me to listen to my body, but you've not told me what to listen for.
And it's so
And I
easy
think,
to like either let fear consume you or to let athlete brain almost
yeah,
like be dismissive, where you're like, it's probably fine though. Like, it's not that big of a deal. They said this is normal, cramping is normal, maybe some spotting is normal. Oh, that like sharp shooting pain. I actually just like want to finish this set or finish this run. And like, so athlete brain is so powerful that it overrides our ability to actually listen to our body because we're only able to like tune into that voice because that is what is trained. We're actually not trained to listen to our body as athletes. You are trained to do the opposite of that. You're trained to ignore
yeah.
your
I know I was saying this to one of my coaches. I was like, I'm trained to failure before pregnancy. So if you tell me to listen to my body and I'm listening, I'm training to failure.
right.
Yeah, that hurts. So if you're telling me to, I've usually not listened to that voice, because that's how it gets me to powerlifting and lifting heavy and getting stronger. So yeah, for me, it took a bit of adjustment to sort of say, okay, if it hurts, you're not being soft. Just stop. There's no, just stop and reassess what you're doing. and then decide whether, you can carry on or whether you need to adjust and modify something.
Yeah, because there does come a point of like diminishing returns where you're like, this isn't actually helping me be a better athlete. And it's certainly not helping me feel good right now. So it's neither good for my short term, like dopamine hit, and it's definitely like not good for my long term performance goals and nevertheless like core and pelvic health. So that's why I think, athletes, you're not always going to have a coach who knows this stuff. You're probably rarely going to have an OBGYN who's like working with you on, again, that zoomed out scope of like long-term performance in core and pelvic health. Like you're just not going to have that. So you have to be the, in some ways, the expert on your body where you're at least able to have that self-awareness to say like, this probably isn't serving me in this moment and it's not really serving me long term. And then like, how can we make adjustments? Like, where is there an opportunity to, you're not fragile, you're also not invincible. So like, let's find that line of like being a really adaptable athlete. And ultimately that's what's going to make you the best athlete long term. That is the secret. But that is a hard thing. That's a hard lesson to learn when you're a pregnant athlete, as you are currently realizing, huh?
Gosh, it is hard because just like you said, you may not have an obstetrician that understands or alongside you or a trainer alongside. And, even though I have all these different hats, it's still been an interesting ride. Like the first trimester was awful. But I see all these influences and I look at them and I'm like, oh my God, I wish I was doing this. But first trimester is oh, if you've had a rough first trimester, then you can wish everything in the world. But oh, I was getting out of breath climbing the stairs. I was nauseous the whole time. I'm still nauseous now at 26 weeks, but it's much better. I think there was a point at between 5 and 8 weeks where I just had to realize there was no way I was getting to the gym, and that's fine. There was, I wasn't going to lose anything in 3 weeks, but actually, I just physiologically there was no way that I was going to be able to do anything that was of any value. And then also sort of realizing, well, when you did feel like it, you didn't need to do a whole workout to the level that you did before. Just maybe for my mental health, getting out and getting to the gym, getting a short something in there, just so I felt normal. Yeah, it's the first trimester was tough.
I mean, it just really forces you for whatever reason, whether it is like extreme fatigue or like you're just not motivated, or, it's maybe you're having symptoms of some kind. Like it's just, it can be such a humbling experience because you're like, I want to do this. I feel like I should be able to do X, Y, or Z because I'm fit, because I know a lot, because whatever it might be. And then you have to almost get to know this new and temporary version of yourself and like accept who she is this week, and then know that that's not like your entire personality. That doesn't have to be like who you are from this point forward. It's just who you are at this point in your pregnancy, in this season of life as a mom.
Yeah. And then to add to that, like I kind of went through a lot of miscarriages before I got to this particular pregnancy. So I know that there is no evidence between what you do in the gym and how you exercise and miscarriages at all. But even then, there was at one point this little voice that did say to me, should you really be doing this? And even I had to stop and say, well, what's making me uncomfortable? And it was just like an episode of spotting that I had at 6 weeks. And it had nothing to do with the gym, but straight afterwards I thought, should I take a day off? Should I not? And it's really interesting because as I was saying, like as an obstetrician and gynecologist, I know from the research side of things, there is actually no evidence between sort of what I do in the gym and sort of miscarriage is going to happen, it's going to happen. And I had pretty much accepted that. But, that adds another sort of way of looking at things, which I think a lot of athletes who are going through subfertility, for example, or miscarriages will then also start thinking, well, I know logically that this is not going to have a bad effect. But yet there is this little voice that sometimes tells you, well, should you really be doing this? And then there was an element of feeling a bit conflicted. And I think there was probably a couple of days after I had some spotting where I just thought, well, I'll just stop because if something was to happen, am I going to look back and think, should I have done that? And I don't want to have any regrets in that sense. And I know the logic is that my exercise has nothing to do with this. So I'm not even going to go down that road.
Yeah. No, I think that's such insightful advice and reassurance, especially coming from you, where like you've experienced loss. And then like, so your emotional side is like, we can create so many narratives and attachments and almost like self-blame for certain things. But then like the logical side of like your OBGYN brain is like, but I know that's not the truth. And it's hard. I think it's so hard for so many athletes to navigate like, especially if they've experienced loss. Like, what do I do? What do I not do? If they're experiencing different fertility treatments, like, should I work out? Should I not? I just like want everything to go perfectly. I've invested so much time and so much money into this process. I don't want to like do anything that will make it worse. And, we can sit here and say, we don't have any evidence for, exercise as it relates to miscarriage or stillbirth or any kind of loss. But at the same time, like acknowledging the mental and emotional state of like, but if it's gonna mind fuck you, it is not worth doing right now. Like if you are ever gonna sit there and blame yourself and think that like because you did too hard of a run or lifted too heavy that you caused X, Y, or Z, and you know that you will almost like there can be a lot of self-sabotage there, then like don't do it. And it's okay. Like it is totally okay to do less, to almost give yourself that grace and benefit of the doubt and know that like you can run hard and lift heavy and do all those things again, but we don't need to add that element or that variable of emotional and mental like that just fear, right? Like we don't need to opt into that. Let's not opt into it then. You know? You got
I
to
mean,
know
that was pretty much it. It was, if I do this and something was to happen, I'm going to wonder,
Mhm.
even though the logical side of my brain says that this has probably got nothing to do with it, why would I add that psychological element to, to everything else that's going on right now?
Yeah.
And yeah, yeah.
And
I mean,
athletes we're like always wanting to assign value or reasoning to something, right? Because we're like, well, if I do X, Y, or Z, then I'm going to get this result. If I didn't get this result, then where did I go wrong in my process and how can I make it better next time? And it's just this cycle, but that is how you are wired to think. If you are competitive, if you are driven, if you have invested any kind of time into a process of going to med school, of becoming a triathlete, of being a powerlifter or CrossFitter or whatever it might be, like you are so used to process and outcome. And then if you don't get the outcome you want to go back and rethink your process and do it better next time and do it differently. And that's going to be part of your story anyway. But I think it's just kind of finding that element of grace, knowing that there's just a lot of variables that influence how we feel and what our experience is like during pregnancy, postpartum, and throughout our experience as mothers. There just is. There's a lot of variables.
it was pretty much the can I versus should I. Can I go to the gym? Yeah, I probably can. Should I? Not from a physical perspective, but from a mental health and emotional perspective. Yes, the gym usually serves me from a mental health perspective, but in that particular instance, I thought, do you know what? Couple of days off is not going to hurt anyone, least of all me.
Yeah, right. Because again, I try to tell people this, like now that I'm on the other side of like having itty bitty babies and not growing them in me anymore, and they're like just alongside, like your life as an athlete is not over. Like it's just not over. And it actually gets way better. It really does. It really can get better. And so it is okay to have a season of like doing less. You're just doing less. You're doing less as an athlete. You're not getting the same kind of workout. And that's not to say that like you can't train hard during pregnancy or train, in the early trenches of motherhood. It's just, it's going to look different. And there's still an opportunity, a delayed gratification, so to speak, on the other end of like, man, like, yeah, that was definitely a season of different, but also like it wasn't for nothing. You sort of start to see the benefit and the value and the potential that you still have.
I think even physiologically, like I have to look back. And I remember saying to my coach, I can't remember when it was, but probably between March 2023 and before I got pregnant this time round, I'd kind of looked back and I said, I haven't made any progress in 12 months. And she just looked at me and said, you've had 3 miscarriages. You've either been pregnant or post miscarriage for 12 months. So what were you expecting? And I thought, oh yeah, that's quite true. And we just forget that, okay, even when it comes from a miscarriage perspective, I had to be honest, I was very logical about my miscarriages because I see them a lot. I see so many patients with them. I see really bad cases. I see cases of ectopics and molar pregnancies. And, basically the way I always looked at it was if I had to, roll a dice, of course it was going to happen. It happens to 25% of all pregnancies. So it's not that big a deal. And then second one happened. And at that point, I thought, you know what, it's probably still bad luck. But I did start thinking, okay, I should maybe start looking if there is a reason or whatever. But the one thing that kind of I used as my crutch was, well, okay, I'm not pregnant, so right, I should just go back to normal. And that was hard because my brain was ready to be back to normal, back to training, back. I mean, I didn't really stop training throughout my miscarriages. I just carried on going to the gym, my same sessions, did what I could. If I couldn't, I couldn't. But I remember saying to my coach at the time, I want my body back. I want my body back. If it's not housing a baby and I'm not pregnant, then why is it not mine? Because physiologically, I was still tired. My strength was down. What other symptoms? It was just mainly that. On the outward side, I didn't look pregnant. I had accepted that I wasn't pregnant. So then I remember at the gym being really upset trying to do a set of deadlifts and going, I can't do this. And speaking to one of the trainers who then sort of let in that she'd had a miscarriage a few months before and she knew exactly where I was coming from. And the fact that I was still there, keeping going and carrying on still meant quite a lot. But I remember that being actually the hardest part about my miscarriages. It was, well, if I'm not pregnant, why am I not myself?
Yeah.
And I should know better. Because I know how physiologically, miscarriages, you still have all the pregnancy hormones, the emotional side of things. So why was I expecting that suddenly, just because I'd had a miscarriage, that I should be back to normal?
Right. And I think that is so similar to, I mean, it is a postpartum experience, right? And I think that is why after loss or after having the baby, there is this feeling of like, well, I'm not pregnant anymore. Like we almost give ourselves this expectation of, well, I should be able to do this because I'm not pregnant anymore. Like this is just my body now. But really, like your body is recovering from trauma. Your body was recovering from grief and loss and like a significant physiological process that maybe you couldn't like see as glaring as like, a baby physiological process, but like there's just so much to recover from, period. Like there's just so much to recover from, but we almost don't allow ourselves to recover because there's this expectation of like, well, I'm not pregnant anymore, so I should just be myself again. But
Yeah.
it's a long time to be yourself again.
I think it took 3 months after each miscarriage to physiologically, like, I wear a health tracker and stuff. If I sort of looked at all my data, I could probably look back and say, yeah, it takes at least 8, if not 12 weeks to be back at some sort of baseline. And even then, your baseline is not going to be straight away your pre-pregnancy baseline, but to start feeling an element of normal again.
Yeah.
And yeah.
What was some of the data that you could almost like see on, do you use like a Whoop or something like that? Or,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
okay,
So
so like
I've got a Whoop, and honestly, I do love it. Um, I
I just
actually,
got one and I'm trying to like experiment with it, but I find that so fascinating to like think about it in terms of pregnancy, miscarriage, later in pregnancy, postpartum, and like being able to look at some of the data of things that change that you wouldn't necessarily expect to change. So, can you give me some insight on what you've, I guess, discovered through your processes so far?
so I mean, firstly, I got the Whoop, I think, after my first miscarriage that I knew about.
Mhm.
So yeah, I got it in like September last year. So, but I'd say it knew I was pregnant before I did. Essentially, I have to say this with a bit of caution because I do understand physiology and pregnancy physiology, so I could interpret it. But essentially, we all know that your heart rate variability which most people use as a signal of how sort of recovered you are or how healthy you are. So your heart rate variability drops when you become pregnant, and your resting heart rate increases. But I actually didn't realize that it was as profound as I could look at my Whoop data and tell you the day I conceived because it all went sort of haywire from then. So my heart rate variability would like literally plummet resting heart rate would go up. And obviously at the time, you don't know you're pregnant. So you're looking at the data going, but I've slept enough and I've eaten well. And, I should be in the green recovery. Why am I in amber and red? And 2 weeks later, when you miss a period, or in my case, when I missed a period, I tested and I thought, oh, that's what that was about. And you can kind of go back. And it was very accurate in terms of conception dates because each time I had a scan or anything, it actually confirmed that was potentially the date.
That is so cool. Whoop needs to sponsor us. That's all I'm
I,
saying.
I mean, I said I actually did comment on something on Whoop around pregnancy because they were saying that they are looking at, with our permission, if we, if we've ticked that we're pregnant, they asked for our permission to gather the data because they've noticed something else interesting, that the same changes that you see in terms of heart rate variability and resting heart rate when you become pregnant, all of that almost goes back to some sort of baseline about 7 weeks before you go into spontaneous labor. So they wondered whether that was your body now showing an adaptation mechanism where it knows that you've got this marathon, which is labor.
Yeah.
So it's basically giving you all of your reserves back. But obviously, at the time, it's just a hypothesis at the moment. So they're trying to see if there is anything behind that they've picked up. So yeah, I'd be happy to work with Whoop.
Yeah, would be so cool. And then when you experienced loss, what were some of the what did you notice in terms of the data on your watch or whatever?
So surprisingly, well, I and this was quite interesting to my colleagues as well. So with my second miscarriage, so the one in January, I same sort of data change, but obviously I didn't know at the time until I missed a period and tested. But I got to sort of 5, 6 weeks and I didn't feel that tired at the gym. I didn't feel nauseous. And I just knew intrinsically something wasn't right. And yeah, my husband was like, no, every pregnancy is different. You can't just say that, which is true. And my colleagues were like, you're being very negative. And then I looked at my Whoop data and I can't remember what sort of data it was. I think it was somewhere between 5 and 6 weeks. And my heart rate variability and resting heart rate had basically gone back to my pre-pregnancy baseline. And I had a green recovery. And I just thought, no, 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 this definitely means something. And again, I'd say this with caution because, I had to I knew how to interpret the data and as well as I had a feeling. I then asked my colleague, I said, look, I'm telling you, this is a miscarriage. Can you just check my bloods? I don't want you to scan me. It's too early. You're not going to see anything. And
Yeah.
she said, well, let me scan you and we'll do some bloods. And actually, the blood tests were going down. So the progesterone and the hormone levels were all going down. So it did confirm that it was a miscarriage. But my colleagues were like, how did you know? How did you know? I said, well, I've got this health tracker. And actually, if you look at the data, and they were like, this is really interesting. Obviously, we don't want all patients to try and interpret this themselves
Right.
until there's enough evidence out there to say, look, this is what this means. And, you have to interpret with some element of context as well.
So,
Um,
and I think that is the hard thing in general with some of these data trackers is like it can almost be too much information where it becomes self-sabotaging where you're like, oh my God, it says my recovery is shit today. And then like you create a narrative where you're like, and I can't lift heavy and I can't perform. I'm going to have a horrible day. And it's because like your brain just saw that and was like, yes, we're going
yeah,
to find that, so like it can
yeah,
be a slippery slope, but I do find this so interesting and certainly something to take with a grain of salt. But man, I think that it's going to be, there's so much potential to unlock with just navigating pregnancies and postpartum and how to better support the body through those experiences.
yeah. I mean, there's not enough women's health research. We know this, and there's not
To say the least.
yeah, anything. So, if anything, like the fact that Whoop are even looking into this, because I guess they see that there is a gap, a huge gap, and the funding is not there for research, etc. So, anything that we can get that helps us understand physiology a bit more and understand sort of these changes in pregnancy is only going to help athletes, help normal people, help us as obstetricians and doctors to help our patients.
Yeah, and like it has me thinking like because now perimenopause and menopause is getting more like I guess mainstream and talked about. Um and there's not like a specific test to say like you're in perimenopause or whatever. Like, I'm wondering if some of that same data could be used as clues of like, well, when this starts to shift, when you start to notice this, like almost like where we can look at these trends across time and say, like, I'm doing the same things I was doing a year ago or 2 years ago, but like these things have changed. Like, that could be a good, I feel like that could be a really good indicator. And I feel like, now I'm just talking out of my ass because I don't really know. But I do think it could be interesting. Like, one way to measure things that are really kind of hard to measure with female bodies.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been a big fan of like individualized, personalized healthcare. I remember being like a teenager and thinking, back, was it late 90s, early 2000s, thinking, oh, I wish there was a way that somebody could tell me what was good for me as an individual, what diet, what exercise, and then I could just go and do it rather than all of this guessing and guesswork. And I didn't actually know that, fast forward 20 years and actually we'd have access to these wearable health techs and things like, I don't know if you've come across, but we've got something called the Zoe app in the UK, which is, it's doctors, nutritionists, lots of allied health professionals, but essentially it's an app that they use similar technology. You do a glucose test, you do a fat clearance test, and then they basically give you data and you can track what you eat and it will tell you what effect those foods will have on your biology. And I just think that's fascinating.
So
And
fascinating.
it's amazing. So to an extent, it's giving you some insight into how your individual body works. And yes, I've always been a bit skeptical about AI and the dangers. Like anything, there's going to be good and bad. But I definitely can see the good in some of these things, a lot of the good in these things.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. I mean, it's just a fascinating conversation to have and at least have awareness around, right? Like, we don't, whether you choose to opt into that or not, like we just can know like the different variables that change during pregnancy that may contribute to our recovery or not postpartum, and just like kind of, again, supporting the whole person, not just is it physiologically safe for the baby during pregnancy, or maybe you have stopped bleeding postpartum, therefore you're cleared. But like, let's look at all of these variables that are influencing your health and overall well-being.
Yeah. Yeah. And we are so far from that, but we're getting there step by step.
We are getting there. We are getting there. So when we talk about you're cleared, which this is, I think, like a lot of people during pregnancy, they kind of navigate their own training and maybe they keep doing what they've always done. Maybe, they are willing to make some adjustments to their training. They're cleared postpartum. Whether they've had a vaginal birth or cesarean, you and I, we've talked about this a million times, so I know I'm not totally speaking for you, but like both birth methods, there's no right or best way to have a baby. It's all extremely relative. And yet, because there's no better necessarily option, they're just different. Talk to me about, like, they both require postpartum rehab and recovery, right?
100%.
And I think a lot of times people are like, oh, I am so far, I have such a huge setback because I had a C-section, or like, I'm good to go because I had a vaginal birth, or vice versa. And I'm like, no, man, like, no matter how that baby came out, it's a big deal. It is a big deal. There's no like better option. They're just different considerations.
Yeah. I mean, yes, definitely. I mean, one is you've had surgery, so we have to take the fact that we have cut through so many layers into your abdomen. Those are going to need to heal. Those are going to need to, then you're going to have to rehab on top of that. But if you've had a vaginal birth, you've got to remember that, yes, we've not cut through any of the muscles essentially, but a lot of the pelvic floor muscles have moved out of the way. They have had a strain and a load for 9 months on them. So, it's not quite as simple as, well, it's fine. I had a nice vaginal delivery that was physiological and all of that, and I should be fine, because actually the rehab is still needed and the rehab is still there. I mean, I remember one of my old bosses when I was much more junior, and he heard that I was powerlifting and he was a urogynecologist. He just used to make comments about what my pelvic floor must be like if it wasn't already ruined. And I remember he showed me an MRI of a woman's pelvis before a pregnancy and delivery. And then he showed me the same woman's MRI after. And he was like, that is what childbirth does to your pelvic floor. And it looked very different. And I mean, his was a bit of scare tactics to get me to stop lifting heavily because he thought that was bad for my pelvic floor. But essentially, I was like, well, hold on. If that is the pelvic floor after a baby's passed through it, we do have to spend some time rehabbing and thinking that it's not just that just because it was a natural process and we're built to do this, that suddenly we're going to snap back and everything's going to be fine.
Right.
So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because I think like, something that, and this is a sensitive topic, of course, but the number one cause of prolapse is a vaginal birth. And most people do not know what pelvic organ prolapse is until they're like, oh my God, my vagina either looks different or feels different or both. And that, in postpartum. And they're not necessarily looped in on that being a possibility, even. And I think, I've talked with Jocelyn Fitzgerald. She's one of the UroGyns in the coach course, and she's been on the podcast and just kind of talking about like more informed care of like understanding, like if you have a vacuum birth or forceps are used or even a vaginal birth, then maybe you are going to be more prone to prolapse. It's not an automatic thing, but it's something to be aware of. So then you can approach your postpartum rehab really specifically. If you're somebody who bears down a lot, so we talk so much about like pressure management strategies and breathing strategies during pregnancies, but you're a powerlifter, you know this better than anybody. But like, okay, let's not just like have a bearing down strategy. Let's like get that our Valsalva or our breathing tendencies higher and wider, breathe into the lats, like change some of these tendencies, knowing essentially the impact that pregnancy and delivery and postpartum can have on the pelvic floor. It's not invincible. So like we have to know that and not wait until after the fact where you're like, something's wrong with my vagina to be like, damn, I wish I would have known. And unfortunately, that is the reality of so many people. They don't know because these conversations haven't been had, how we have them.
Yeah. And it's not even as simple as, well, if I have a vaginal delivery, then I'm at risk of prolapse, so I'll just have a section.
Right.
Because actually I have patients who have prolapses despite having cesarean sections.
Right.
And actually
Or
it's
without even having babies.
yeah. Or yes, or even without having babies. And it's essentially it's the 9 months of the being pregnant, the pressure on the pelvic floor. If you've not had pregnant, is it that there's a collagen disorder? Is there a connective tissue disorder? What else have you done in your life? So it's so nuanced and it's not quite as simple as, oh, you don't want to have a prolapse, or you'll just have a cesarean. Because I get patients asking that question and it's not even that simple.
No, it's like paying attention to your tendencies of like, what do I tend to do? A lot of power lifters will do this like bear down in the pelvic floor, right? So if I'm working with a power lifter, or if I'm a power lifter, then I'm going to know I need to really practice during my pregnancy, a redistribution of how I am lifting, what my breathing mechanics are, maybe some of my positional mechanics. I'm going to tweak my tension a little bit so that I can really down train this pelvic floor. I'm not adding more stress and pressure to it. Postpartum, if I know that I had a really rough delivery, I pushed for 4 hours, like, man, okay, that means your vagina has been through it. Like, give it some grace and some time to recover, because that's probably going to be different than the considerations of somebody who had a C-section or somebody who had a baby really fast. But okay, somebody had a baby really fast. Well, then the pelvic floor had to go through so much without a
Yeah.
lot of time to acclimate. So then that carries their own considerations.
Risks.
So what I'm trying to say with all of this is like, there is no best or right option. They are all different and all have their own unique considerations. So you have to have a really good understanding of like your predispositions, both prior to pregnancy and with the kind of birth experience you had.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like you said that, you can choose to have a cesarean, for example, if you wanted. You can also try for a vaginal delivery. Nobody's guaranteed that that will result in a vaginal delivery. You may end up with an emergency cesarean. So I always say this, go into labor with an open mind
Yes.
as best as you can, because you have very little control over what happens. We have very little control as your doctors over what happens. And essentially, we all just have to be honest about this. My job is there to be a risk assessor of all of the things that could happen and could go wrong in each individual case. But beyond that, I think the best thing you can do is evaluate after the fact and say, okay, well, how did I deliver? What was my pregnancy like? Try and mitigate for the risks along the way as you can. But essentially, the best and most sort of wise thing to do is stop afterwards and say, okay, well, this happened, right? So how am I going to structure my recovery now and my rehab now so that I have longevity in my journey?
Right. Yeah, these are the cards that have been dealt. So now that I know them, what is my next right thing? What is my next right step? Who do I talk to? Like what conversation do I have with my OBGYN? What conversation do I have with my pelvic floor PT? How can I work with a coach who like really gets me and what I want to do and also understands like what my body has just experienced? Like let's help connect all these dots. And I mean it's a process, but it's also a privilege to be able to have that kind of insight because not even a decade ago was this conversation happening. And I'd argue even 5 or 6 years ago, this conversation wasn't as exposed as it has become. And it's still kind of an underground theory or approach.
And I think, if anything, over the last couple of years, I've probably seen the opposite. It's very much the we're kind of invincible, if anything. If I'm seeing a lot of, and I don't know if that's just the algorithm showing me these things, but yeah, I always have to wonder, am I just seeing this now because the algorithm's showing me these things? But I do get the feeling that actually it's gone from, oh, women are fragile to, well, actually you're quite invincible, so just go ahead and do everything and don't think too much about it. If you did it before, carry on. And it's like we say, it's like we're not invincible, we're not fragile. There is a middle way somewhere, and
Yeah.
everybody's middle way is going to be a bit different.
Yeah. And I mean, I know you know like my origin story, but I was pregnant in 2013. So like forever ago now. And at that time, it was like, a lot of the CrossFit fit mom vibe. Like there was no talk of modification. It was only like basically be a badass, do rope climbs, lift as heavy as you can, and double under that baby out. There was no sense of like any middle ground, or it was the do nothing. Clearly I'm not a do nothing person. So it's so easy to gravitate towards that one approach because I think people want relatability. They want to see someone and be like, yeah, well, if she's doing that, and we're kind of similar-ish. We have similar interests or similar goals. Like then that's how I'm going to approach my process. We didn't have guidance then, and it honestly took getting so humbled, smacked in the face by my own ego, a really traumatic birth, a hard time postpartum, like an entire identity shift for me to be like, holy shit, like there's got to be a middle ground here. It is not just extremes. And, that's honestly what created the P&PA brand was like, let's have a middle ground of conversations where we can acknowledge like we are not these fragile creatures during pregnancy and as mothers. And also we don't need to go full send and have an invincible mindset where your ego will slap you in the face eventually. Like whether it's your mental health is struggling, your physical health struggles, your overall experience as a human, like you struggle, like we can find a middle ground and help women find their way. And as much as like we've created progress over the last decade, like you said, it's still there. Like the more millennials and younger women that are getting pregnant, they're like, man, I've grown up lifting. Whereas like maybe the generation ahead of us, like they weren't lifting. They weren't training in the same capacities that you and I have grown up in the gym since we were in our early 20s. Like we're like the same age. So that's been part of our identity and our culture. Whereas the generations before us, not as much. But these young girls coming up who are now in their teens and 20s, they are, I mean, I don't even know what it's going to be like because they almost have this even more bought in than we were, and we were real freaking
Yeah.
bought
I
in.
mean, I'm hoping it just means that what we're teaching and what we're trying to get out there is actually going to be more accessible. So actually, they're going to have the right
I hope.
information.
I
I
hope.
absolutely hope so.
Yeah.
And then they won't be in sort of the conundrum that we sort of, yeah, our generation has been. And you're right, because the generation before us, it was very much do lots of cardio, don't lift. And then obviously you can't do as much cardio when, you're pregnant if your stamina is down, etc. So it was very easy for them to say, well, oh, it's fine, we'll just pause the gym membership, we'll just go back to this
Right.
afterwards. Whereas we know that, well, lifting, you don't necessarily, it's not a bad thing, it's not counterintuitive to pregnancy or counterproductive. So how can I actually do this alongside everything and then get back to it when I'm back again? I think the key for me was I had to start looking at my fitness and my health journey in a more longevity mindset. Like I've done the cuts and I've done the muscle bulk phases and I've done all of that and as well as sort of doing powerlifting. So I've done a bit of everything and I knew that when I was going to start trying to get pregnant, I couldn't be doing either of these things. And I wasn't really unhealthy, but some of the habits you do form when you're doing one or the other, they're not the healthiest sometimes. And I had to switch to a, well, longevity mindset
Yeah.
to then be able to say, well, how do I want this season of my life to look like, with a view that I want it to carry on afterwards. I don't want this to end when motherhood begins, like you said. So you have to almost put the longevity goggles on and start looking at things from that perspective.
That
And
is,
that must be really hard for your athletes who are actually like competing afterwards, because yes, longevity is the long game, but they also have a short-term goal that they need to get as well, like qualifying or getting back,
it's
getting
tricky.
back
And
to
that's why we
performing.
see so many different timelines to work with and so many considerations that go beyond maybe like what is ideal versus like what the reality is and trying to do that. You said all of that so beautifully. And I think pregnancy and postpartum for female athletes act as these incredible catalyst seasons for that lifetime of athleticism. That this is the pivotal point, I think, for so many female athletes is when they become mothers, that unlocks a whole new area of potential and what it really looks like to train for longevity, to train for health and happiness and family, like the kind of family value that you want. Like it is so cool to see it come full circle. Like I feel like I'm entering this new season of life as a mom and as an athlete, and I'm seeing it in my kids now. I just had that freaking reel go viral and like of like my boys and the neighbors working out. And I'm like, they just do it because they see it because it's been normal for them literally their entire lives. They know nothing different. They have coached with me. They've been in me when I'm working out. Like they know nothing else. And I think for so many people, maybe that's like odd, but I'm like, for them in their little worlds, that is just what you do. Training and working out and having fitness involvement and goals and health, when that is just what they have been exposed to, we are literally changing cycles long
Yeah.
term. We are
I mean,
changing a
this is how we're
large.
going to get, yeah, this is how we're going to get generational change. I mean, I know
Yes.
we spoke a bit about like the obesity epidemic, and I look at things from not just the pregnancy, postpartum, and athletics sort of side of things. I kind of go out a bit further and look at well, we have an obesity epidemic across the globe. So if as a doctor, I'm supposed to somehow be able to help my patients, we need to be able to tell patients, we need to be able to tell them how we're going to help them, in terms of nutrition, in terms of exercise. I don't think we've, I don't think we've found the answer yet, because it's not just what you eat. It's not just how you train. It's the mental health. There's the whole psychology aspect to it. And, it is to an extent, like you said, it's about instilling what the norms are. And it was the same for me growing up. My dad was, I mean, he did bodybuilding when he was sort of 15 onwards, and then
Wow.
he was boxing from when he was quite young. So he put us into like Muay Thai, doing Thai boxing when we were quite young. We joined every sports club, and he went out of his way to make sure. And that was quite normal to us. So, like, for a lot of people in my age group, and especially, I was born in the UK, my family had moved from elsewhere. So, we're sort of second generation immigration. It wasn't normal for people who looked like me to be doing the things I was doing. But my dad kind of made it like, no, this is a really important part of life. Self-defense is really good for you, but it's also good for your health. So he kind of drilled the sports side into us, because he was like, this is just really important for your function and health and mental health and everything.
God, I love that. And I mean, I feel like it just like look at the life advantage so much of that gave you, like that exposure at a young age. I feel like that just unlocks, especially for girls and women, like so much confidence. And it can truly change the trajectory of somebody's life, make you high achieving and confident in so many other capacities that extend far beyond fitness or far beyond what you look like. And like that's the opportunity we get to have as mothers, is say like, I'm doing this not to look a certain way, but to feel a certain way, and then to instill like traits and belief systems in a kid that like you can tell them like, oh honey, I'm so proud of you, I believe in you. But like for them to feel that and then to believe in themselves because they're putting in, like they see us do that too. Like that's how it's not just telling, it's showing them and then helping guide that, exposing. And I don't know, it's been really cool to really see all of this starting to come full circle. And, I think we have to keep that in mind when we talk about pregnant athletes. Like this is the opportunity. This is when you are really starting to carve out what your impact as an athlete and your influence and like why you train. This is where all of that gets unlocked.
And you're going to pass it on to the next generation, which is having a huge public health effect.
Yes, it is. It's so cool. And I'm so excited for you. I'm so excited for what this next season of life for you is going to unlock for you as an athlete, as a woman, as a doctor. Like it's going to be really cool. And I'm excited that you've shared so much about your personal experiences here and your professional insight. I'm sure there's going to be more requests for like a round 2 with you. And I'm just so appreciative of all your contributions to this brand and this work.
Oh, no problem. Thank you so much for having me once again.
Yeah. And if people wanted to follow you on social media, your account are you a private account? I can't remember. Where can people get a hold of you if they want to? Or
they can get a hold of me on Instagram. It's Lamia Zafrani. I haven't, it is my personal account, but I completely don't mind. I'm a bit behind in setting up my my actual account, but we'll get there.
Yeah, get there. Like I said, you're going to unlock this whole new world of inspiration in just a few months. It's going to be awesome.
Great.
Thank you so much for coming on. We will talk soon.
Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Practice Brave podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review and help us spread the work we are doing to improve the overall information and messaging in the fitness industry and beyond. Now, if you are pregnant and you are looking for a trustworthy exercise program to follow, I have you covered. The Pregnant Athlete Training Program is a well-rounded program for pregnancy with workouts for each week that are appropriate for your changing body. That's 36 weeks of workouts, 3 to 4 workouts each week, and tons of guidance on exercise strategy. We also have an at-home version of that program. If you are postpartum and you're looking for an exercise program to follow, the 8-week Postpartum Athlete Training Program would be a really great way to help bridge the gap between rehab and the fitness you actually want to do. From there, we have the Practice Brave Fitness Program, which is an ongoing strength and conditioning program where you get new workouts each week and have a lot of guidance from myself and my co-coach, Heather Osby. This is the only way that I'm really offering ongoing coaching at this point in time. If you have ever considered becoming a certified pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coach, I would love to have you join us. Pregnancy and Postpartum Athleticism is a self-paced online certification course that will up-level your coaching skills and help connect the dots between pelvic health and long-term athletic performance, especially during pregnancy and postpartum. Become who you needed and become who your online and local community needs by becoming a certified pregnancy and postpartum athleticism coach. Thank you again for listening to the Practice Brave podcast. I appreciate you. And please help me continue spreading this messaging, this information, and this work.